Her next child, a girl born 14 months after Azor's birth, was darker, but dark it appeared to Tristan with an Indian redness. He had no objection to Isabel's naming the baby Cordelia, after her mother, whom she scarcely remembered. The arrivals filled the shack with the innocent intensity of their own needs, their tantrums and tumbles, their colic and spit-up, their hunger and excrement, affording the adults little time to doubt the course fate had chosen for them. Nature now told them why they had come together. The manicurists' cooperative found an old woman, a toothless Tupi, severed from her tribe, to take care of the children for some hours of the day, so Isabel could go back to work. The name of this addition to their household, who came at noon and left at night and would not reveal where she slept, was Kupahaki. The thunderous hum of the mine had become Tristan's element. Away from this great inverted beehive, even to be with Isabel and the two children, he felt a bit attenuated, lopsided, and guilty, as if he were betraying his true wife, the temptress Gold. This sensation, at the mine, of his true self closing around him strengthened when he was actually in his shaft, the deep, neat hole, 5 feet square, which he had picked and dug into the rock of the mountain. The claim adjacent to his on the left, idle for a year, had been taken over by a team of brothers and cousins from the state of Alagoas, the Gonzagas, and the team of them were rapidly digging down on 2 sides, overtaking Tristan's solitary progress, exposing his shaft to air and sun. But there were still 7 or 8 vertical feet of enclosed rock in which he could lose himself, where the hum dwindled to a faraway murmur, and the sky shrank to a tidy blue square overhead, crossed by clouds like actors in a drama, seen through a peephole. For some days Tristan had been following a twisting stretch of pallor down the leftward wall, a ruddy pallor of the type thought most promising, for gold was generally found in association with her brothers, copper and lead. When the earth blushes, the miners said, gold was about to bare herself, gold in her naked shining. His pick attacked the rock, solid blow after blow. With an awkward effort, Tristan was swinging sideways, since the vein of ruddy pallor was turning inward, away from him. His pick, slashing inward, bared a glint, or so his eyes, tormented by the dimness and by stone dust, seemed to tell him. He got down on his knees and attacked the cranny of rock, broadening the glint. In another 2 hours, squinting as if into a furnace, Tristan had carved away enough matrix above and below to pick the nugget free, for a nugget it was, a rough yet silky chunk of gold, the essence of wealth, in his palm, far heavier than a comparable piece of stone. He moved it from one hand to the other, agitated. He tried to hide its glittering from even the square of sky above. If any of the thousands of men humming around him knew of this, he would be killed for it. "We are rich," he told Isabel that evening. "You no longer need to leave our home in the day to be with the manicurists. Perhaps we can buy a farm in Paraná, or a small house by the sea in Espírito Santo." "My father might find us then," she said. "What do we care? We have given him grandchildren. Have I not proved these years to be a loyal husband?" She smiled at his naivete. "These have been hard years, and something of our love has suffered. But we have been safe here, and hidden. I fear this nugget will drag us into the light." "You worry too much, my darling. It is your bourgeois blood. Tomorrow I will take the nugget to the cooperative assayer." But Isabel's forebodings were correct. Though Tristan managed to carry his nugget undetected to the assayer's office, from there word spread quickly of the magnificent find. The assayer clucked his tongue appreciatively and lisped a sum in the millions of cruzeiros, which, he explained, would rise each day. Tristan left the nugget in the care of the bank, accepting the receipt with a fear that he would never see the heavenly nugget, his message from beyond, again. It had poured during the night. The slopes and foot-warm ledges of the quarry were melting underfoot. As he approached the area of his claim, he saw a cluster of men gathered. The neglected claims around his were being suddenly worked. Brown backs bent busily into the ore made potent by rumor, and two of the Gonzaga brothers were climbing out of Tristau's own claim. Before he could challenge them, they challenged him. "You bandit!" The older, shorter of the two, named Achilles, cried. "We have looked and measured, and you had burrowed and dug over into our claim. That nugget is ours." "Poachers like you," said the younger and taller Ismael, "should be strung up and dismembered as an example to all garimperos." "I was well within the walls of my own claim," Tristão insisted, though, as he recalled the glint, the frantic sideways picking, he wondered if in truth he had trespassed. The evidence was indeterminate, for not even he could now say from what exact spot in the gouged earth the nugget had come. "We will summon surveyors," Achilles frantically threatened, "and policemen and lawyers." They did sue him, and the suit, which dragged on for months, attracted the attention of the national press. The nugget, repeatedly fetched from its place in the bank safe to be photographed, was the biggest and purest ever unearthed in the Serra do Barraco. One day, Tristão returned from work in the dusk and found a silvery shadow, a man in a gray suit, sitting in one of the shack's 2 chairs. His first thought, shameful, was that Isabel was doing her business in their home now. But then he saw that the man, with his sad expression and grizzled temples and carefully trimmed mustache, was Cesar. Isabel was standing, frightened, by the stove, with fat Azor on her hip and her hair loose to her waist. "My friend, I have found you again," Cesar said, casually displaying his gray gun. "Why do you persecute us? We do not disturb anyone here." "That is not exactly true, my friend. For all its lamentable lack of discipline, Brazil is not yet a total anarchy, altogether without standards, without traditions. You disturb my excellent employer, for one." Cesar, who fancied himself a courtier in the service of Isabel's family, did not expect that Tristão would hurl, with the strength acquired of back-breaking daily labor, a 60-pound sack of ore straight at him, striking him in the face and toppling him backward in the chair. In a lunge, while Isabel screamed and Azor laughed at the excitement, Tristão was kneeling on Cesar's chest and had, with a decisive staccato stroke, smashed the side of his head with the largest of the rocks that had spilled. Tristão gave Isabel Cesar's gun and told her, "We must leave. The world is upon us again." Avoiding the traveled trails, Tristão, Isabel, their children, and the old Tupi, Cupahaki, made their way down through the scree-strewn valleys of the Douradas, traveling always from the sunrise toward the sunset, toward the interminable rolling plateau of the Mato Grosso. The sky became enormous, as if God had breathed a sigh of relief and given up the intense labor of creation, contenting himself with a few repeating forms, tall grass, tangles of low thorns, mixtures of cactus and brush, and occasionally an unimpressive forest. It was Cupahaki who, in the days and weeks of their travel westward, showed them how to catch bats and skinks and toads, spiders and grubs and grasshoppers, how to milk the bombax tree of its water, which berries to pick and which to beware as poisonous, what seeds and nuts were worth the harvesting and the shelling. Tristão was fearful of wasting the 6 cartridges that remained in Cesar's gun. Once he fired at a heron on the wing and missed. Another time he shot a sluggishly waddling anteater whose roasted oily flesh made them all sick. A third time he wounded a deer that on 3 legs scrambled beyond pursuit. The remaining 3 bullets he resolved to keep for a human enemy, if any should appear. Their progress through the monotonous scrub offered the daily urgency of finding food, of staying alive, of staving off the demons of illness that besieged the blood. Azor, who had been plump as a grub at the start, had grown thin limbs and a hollow-eyed stare. He had learned to walk with them, for hours at a time, uncomplainingly, though his face was passing, it seemed to Isabel, into a mummified old age. Cordelia, still suckling, had fared better, though Isabel's milk was drying up. Isabel had lost her female roundness and was as stringy as Kupahaki. "Tristan," she softly asked him one night, "suppose we die out here? Then the vultures will clean us up, and your father will never find us." "Do you think he still pursues?" "More than ever since I killed his agent. I feel your father at our backs." "It is not my father that hunts us," she said defensively. "It is the system." "Dear Isabel, I should never have come into your life. You would be a plump society wife in Rio by now, living on the Avenida Vierasuto." She put her fingertips on his lips. "You are my fate. You are what I have always wanted. I dreamed you, and then you appeared. I am truly happy, Tristan." Isabel felt increasingly at home, rocked within the repeating rhythm of their journey. But Kupahaki noticed ever more recent signs of cultivation in the savannah. In a shallow valley they shunned, they saw a herd, not of bush deer or zebu, but of horses, the mammoth, wild-eyed, servile beasts that European intruders had brought to the continent. "Kwaikuru," the old Tupi said, but could not be made to explain what the word meant. They came to a brown river, too wide and rapid to wade across. They would make a raft tomorrow of balsa logs lashed together with lianas. Sandy terraces had built up along the river's edge, and on the highest of these they settled for the night. An animated trickling and splashing at the edges of the river kept Isabel from sinking deeply into sleep. So it was as an extension of half-formed dreams that tall, naked men, painted like playing cards, materialized in the dim light mixed of moonlight and the glow cast by their campfires' dying embers. The language the men used with each other was harsh and rapid, but not loud, even as the raid reached its quick crisis. They must have been spying, for their actions were planned. Two shadows seized Kupahaki and lifted the old woman up, while one pinned her arms, the other held her hair and, sawing at her throat with the white curve of a sharp-toothed jawbone, twirled her head and pulled it loose. There was a plume, a black feather, of blood, as the body dropped. A disbelieving scream rose in Isabel's throat and jammed. Two other tall shadows lifted up the children, still curled asleep in their cocoons of mosquito netting, and disappeared. Tristan had scrambled to his feet, and thus the Indian assigned to approach them halted. The Indian was naked, but for his conical penis sheath and the bracelets of shell and teeth on his wrists and ankles. His hair was short and rigid with some sort of wax. When he bared his teeth, they were crooked and black. He bared them because in the same muddled light by which he was seen, he saw a man darker and a woman paler than he had ever beheld, and the sight was terrible and holy to him. He carried a lance of sharpened and no doubt poison-tipped bamboo, but held it aloft a fatal second, and Tristan shot him with Cesar's gun. The attacker dropped his spear and uttered a guttural cry of astonishment. He tried to run, but this injury to his mechanism made his legs asymmetrical, so he ran in a circle and then fell inward, toward the fire. Tristan walked to the Indian's kicking body and pointed the pistol, but failed to fire it. Instead, he fished from his shorts what must have been the razor blade, and squatted to do something that his back prevented Isabel from seeing. He explained, "I must keep 2 bullets, perhaps for you and me, if they return." The thought of being killed by him had a beautiful rightness that made Isabel's loins clench. Then against the shining cliff of fantasy, the bitter dull waves of their reality broke. "They've stolen our children," Isabel wailed, the possessive pronoun a lie. "The Indians have horses," Tristão told her. "Listen, you can hear the hoofbeats departing. We can never catch them on foot." The rampart of his brow wrinkled with the intensity of truth-telling. His glare and the set of his mouth were angry. It seemed at her. "Oh, my little babies," she said, and fainted. When her consciousness returned, morning light sparkled on the river's gliding brown skin, and Tristão sat staring into the fire he had rekindled. "What shall we do?" she asked him. "Live as long as we can," he said. "We must cross the river. We must keep moving west. Behind us, there is nothing but grief and danger." The rage of her helplessness surfaced. He seemed so complacent, stating their desperate situation so bleakly, so reasonably. "Why should we trouble ourselves to live?" she asked him. "What is it to the world if we die now or later? Why struggle on for even a day, Tristão?" "It is a sin even to ask," he told her. "Our plain duty is to live." "There is no one there," she screamed, her gesture expanded to include the sky, "to care what your duty is. There is no God. Our lives are a terrible accident. We are born in a mess of pain and hunger and fear and lust drive us on for no purpose whatsoever." He looked grave and spoke softly as if to pull back her outcry from the vastness of scandalized silence. "You disappoint me, Isabel," he said. "Why is the world so elaborate if it has no purpose? Think of the care that goes into the least little insect and weed around us. You say you love me, then you must love life. Life is a gift, for which we must give something back. I believe in spirits," he told her, "and in destiny. You were my destiny, and I yours. If we die without a struggle now, we will never reach our fates. I know this, Isabel. You and I were brought together not to feed children into the world's maw, but to prove love, to make for the world an example of love. I felt this even in the Fushka factory, when it seemed I might never see you again." And it was true that she, submitting to his judgment, and enduring with him the coming weeks of wandering and slow starvation, felt more love than ever. Weeks had passed. They had lain down to die. A little grove of wild wax palms offered a shifting, pleasant shade. Through their slender, undulant trunks, Tristão and Isabel could gaze together down a grassy, scrubby slope toward yet another river. It was late afternoon. The thin shadows were weaving their soft net tighter. The lovers held hands and turned their faces to the sky. Tristão's fingers encountered, loose on Isabel's emaciated finger, the hard circlet of the DAR ring he had once given her, and his eyes, almost as numbly, encountered the presence of, beyond her profile, high leather boots, much battered by wear and weather. Tristão sat up and felt the point of a rapier at the pit of his throat. "Stay, nigger," a deep voice said, not unpleasantly. A brass-colored face, plump but not soft, loomed beyond the embossed cup hilt of the rapier. "From thy gaunt looks, thou hast long been in search of a meal. It would take no deep prick to come out t'other side. And what vision sleeps next to thee? A fair princess, it would appear, far wandered from the court of good Joan Quinto. 2 squares of the chessboard, come to give us a game." And from the jubilant quality of the man's laughter, and that of his companions as they crowded curiously around, Tristão could not doubt that some sort of fun would follow. Even when they fitted heavy, rusty shackles around his wrists and an iron collar with a dangling chain around his throat, he felt, in his passivity and fatigue, that it was being done for his protection. Isabel awoke with a soft cry, transported, it seemed, from the disintegrating theater of her dreams. "Tristão," she said, "if we have died, heaven has rough angels." These ruffians, of whom there were 6 or 7, were all bearded and clad in scuffed and tattered patchworks of leather and cloth. Their number was augmented by 20 or so Indians, whose costumes ranged from stark nudity to the baggy trousers and blouse of a peon field hand. In a curious piece of deference, the leader of the band, the man with the rapier, let her hold the chain on Tristão's neck shackle, as if acknowledging her prior ownership. "I am frightened, Tristão," she confided in a whisper. "Why? These are your people." He hurt her by sounding hostile and bitter. His voice relented a little. "At least we will be fed. These rogues are fat as pigs." The party walked downhill on a broadening path toward the river. Cleared fields and tended plantations of manioc and beans prepared them for the sight of the settlement, a straggling array of round palm-roofed huts. Here the captives, after an hour of being fed and bathed by deft, insistent Indian hands, were taken before an assembly. Their discoverer led them through the excited crowd to another brass-faced man, similar but older and leaner. "I have the honor to be the captain of this bandera of brave and pious Paulistas," he explained, introducing himself with an ironic sonority. "Antonio Alvarez Leñas Peixoto. Thou hast already met my younger brother, José de Alvarenga Peixoto. My mother was a Carillo, and my father a new Christian, that is, a former son of Abraham, as are half the residents of São Paulo. The Holy Office of the Inquisition in Bahia never extended its blessed services so far into the south. Not," he hastened to add, "that the priests would have found us lacking in fervent orthodoxy. By God's wounds, have we not risked our lives and sanity for the salvation of heathen souls? Have we not been beset without mercy on every side by the very savages we seek to save, savages armed and maddened by the Spanish Jesuits, who are black-robed traitors to their race and religion both?" The exhortatory questions seemed addressed not so much to Isabel as to the band of warriors at the captives' backs, to remind them of their mission. "These natives around us," Isabel asked Antonio, "are they all slaves?" "Pray, child, say not slaves. Enslavement of the indigenes is forbidden by royal instruction and condemned by a reiterated papal bull. That is why thy nigger, my lady, is a welcome treasure here. Even in São Paulo, not many can afford the luxury of pure-blooded blacks." "He is no slave," Isabel exclaimed. Antonio's baroque eyebrows lifted in gentle surprise. "What is he, then?" "He is my man, my companion, my husband," Isabel said. She braced herself to withstand a wave of rude laughter, but her words fell into an astonished silence. Antonio spoke to Isabel in a tone of concluding disposition. "This black slave is no longer thy husband, my dear child. Slaves do not marry. Do not despair. I am a lonely man, and not as ancient in my faculties, thou shalt discover, as has first appeared to thee." The old Bandera chieftain took Isabel as his wife, his third wife, since 2 Aborigine women, Taquami and Yanapamoko, already catered to his needs. They did not appear to resent her addition to his household. Her hands lightened their own work, and for her first year they were greatly spared service in Antonio's bed. She became pregnant, and in the 2nd year produced an amber-eyed son, whom she named Salomão, in the hopes he would grow to become wise, and to honor her father. Perhaps thus his pursuing fury would be placated. When she smuggled word of her decision to Tristão, by way of Yanapamoko, the younger of the Indian concubines, younger even than Isabel, a typical dainty indigene beauty with cylindrical, waistless torso and slender, graceful limbs, Tristão sneered and cursed her. "May the child devour her," he said. Perhaps Tristão's curse took hold, for her new baby was curiously quiet and limp in her arms, where Azor had kicked and pushed with his fat little muscles from his first weeks. Tristão, wearing a leg manacle to prevent his escape, had been set to work in the fields at first, but then, as the mechanical skills he had developed in the fuchsia plant and in the gold mine became apparent, he was reassigned to carving the canoes for the Bandeira's eventual move downriver. Holding her unresponsive son in her arms, and finding in his bloodless face barely the strength or wit to suckle, Isabel would weep, and weep doubly at the thought of Tristão, her proud lover, chained to the interminable task of hollowing out a fleet of broad-bottomed canoes with swings of a dull adze. Yanapamoko pitied Isabel. A sisterly love had grown up between them. "You know," Yanapamoko one day said, when the listless child of Antonio's delicate loins was over a year old, "magic still exists. The invaders have not yet destroyed every shred of our old compact with the spirits. A shaman lives 17 days' walk to the west, who might—" "Free Tristão?" Isabel eagerly asked. Yanapamoko hesitated. "I was going to say, who might give your baby the brains other babies have." "Oh, yes?" Isabel tried to sound interested, as a mother should. But as a former Brasilia University student who had taken courses in psychology, she knew that a brain could not be so easily bestowed in its billions of interconnected neurons. "You would come with me, Yanapamoko?" "Yes, I would have to. You would never get there otherwise." "But, darling, why?" The slender young woman averted her face as if to avoid a glancing blow of possible indecency. "I love you," she said. The casual touches, as soft as thin anthers brushing bees' golden-haired legs with velvety cocoa-colored pollen, with which the prior wife had welcomed Isabel into the Bandeira chieftain's household, had evolved, through the many nights, into more prolonged and purposeful caresses, carried on in view of the others in the innocent style of a race to whom nudity was full dress. If at moments the playful cuddling produced a secret shudder, a dew of happiness upon the petals of femininity, and a fluttering wish to reciprocate, as far as the mysteries of flesh permitted, what shame could attach to Isabel's heart, suspended awkwardly as it was between an elderly lover and a shackled one? Yes, the two wives loved each other, and made love. "And Salomão?" she asked. "Must we take him with us? The journey might kill the poor weakling." Yanapamoko's answer was solemn. "No, he must stay. Takwame and her daughters will care for Salomão, feeding him a gruel of manioc and banana. I have noticed your flow of milk has been ceasing, and in any case, your son never thrived upon it." Did Isabel mistake a hint of reproach in the other woman's voice? What did this little sepia female, no bigger than a child, know of mothering, its dead patches, and natural callousness? The forest to the west, across the river, which they traversed on the dawn of their escape by means of one of the small dugout canoes the encampment fishermen kept tied to the bank, could fairly be called jungle, selva, or mata. From the sun-parched masculine scrub of the great Mato, they passed into a lusher, dimmer, feminine world. The trumpet note of the jacu and the screeching and skittering of unseen spider monkeys accompanied their flickering passage through this dense tapestry, whose topmost canopy of branches admitted only slender shafts of sunlight swirling with the dust of insects. Between the monotonous, smooth gray trunks of trees stretching skyward, the growth underfoot was sparse. For miles, the two women walked upon a brown pavement of dead seed husks and palm fronds, as upon the uneven tombstones of some dim, deserted cathedral redolent of rot's sweetish incense. After 17 days, they reached the shaman's settlement, atop a windy mesa. His hut was in texture and shape like an oven-bird's nest, and so small Isabel had to crouch to enter. Smoke hurt and blurred her eyes. A sluggish fire slowly revealed a small naked man lying in a hammock, strung up close behind the fire. His body was smooth with a swollen belly, but his head was wrinkled or withered or else diminished in apparent size by his high, upright headdress of parrot's tail feathers. His face had been cruelly plucked of hair, lashes and brows and temples, but above his prominent ears long white wisps of hair had been allowed to grow like fine, lank, ancillary feathers. Around his ankles he wore bands of large, triangular dried nuts, and in one hand he held a large empty gourd, the size of an ostrich egg, which he shook to emphasize points in his utterance. As soon as the shaman saw Isabel, he closed his eyes and shook his maraca as if to ward off the sight. "Maira," the shaman saluted her. "Who are you? Why do you disturb my peace?" Yanapamoko translated his words into her and Isabel's hybrid language, and often had to ask the toothless shaman to repeat, since besides speaking a strange dialect, he wore a number of polished jadeite plugs in his lower lip, muffling his pronunciation. "Maira," Yanapamoko explained to Isabel, "is their name of a prophet like the Jesus of the Portuguese. He has never seen anyone your color, with hair like sunlight." "I am not a prophet. I am a woman reduced to desperation, come to beg for your magic," she said. Yanapamoko translated, and the shaman frowned and mumbled, interrupting himself with angrily prolonged rattles of his maraca. "He says," Yanapamoko whispered, "magic is men's business. Women are dirt and water. Men are air and fire. Women, I'm not sure of his word. I think it means unclean, but also a sense of tricky business." Then she talked directly to the shaman at some length and explained to Isabel, "I have told him you are come for the sake of your boy-child, whose father was so old the baby was born without the heat of a normal person." "No," Isabel protested to her friend, "I have not come for the sake of Salomon, but for the sake of Tristan, my husband." The shaman looked from one woman to the other, sensing their cross purposes, and brandished his maraca indignantly, saliva gushing from one of the holes in his lip where a jade plug had fallen out. He spoke without raising his voice, compelling the women to bend forward toward his swaying hammock. Yanapamoko, flustered, murmured to Isabel, "He does not like me, because I am a woman of his own race. He does not say this, but I sense it. I think he says you are a man in spiritual form, and so he is willing to talk with you, but only directly." "Oh, but I cannot. Don't leave me with him." "Mistress, I must. I displease him. Magic cannot take place if I am with you." Yanapamoko had already stood on her lovely smooth legs while the shaman gestured and orated on, his spittle flying, his marvelously made headdress of feathers shaking. "He is calling," Yanapamoko explained, "for Kawim and Petum and Yaje." Petum, Isabel discovered, was a strangely flavored tobacco, and Kawim a kind of beer that tasted of manioc. The shaman was impressed by how manfully she, as if restored to her student days in Brasilia, put away the beer and inhaled the tobacco from a long pipe he kept passing her. He took care, it seemed, to blow the smoke directly at her, and when it occurred to her that this was a courtesy, she blew her smoke back at him. A glaze began to overlay her vision, a set of highlights shimmering here and there in the dried mud womb of the hut, and it occurred to her that the pipe held more than tobacco. Perhaps the added ingredient was yaje. The old shaman, with his naked boyish body, his penis decorously dressed in a woven sheath, a straw thimble through which his foreskin had been pulled like a rumpled little orchid cactus flower, said nothing, just contemplated her more and more contentedly. All this time she had been hunkering across the fire from him, her ligaments, stretched by these years among savages and bandeirantes, were comfortable thus stretched. In this position her sarong could not cover her underparts. But then why should underparts be hid? Do they not give us our most glorious moments and guide us through life to our fates? Perhaps this was a drunken reflection. When the shaman at last did speak, she miraculously understood. Certain of his mumbled words stood out like highlights, glimmering with meaning, and the sense of the sentence slitheringly moved through the dark spaces between. Something in the smoke had eaten away at the boundary between their minds. He told her she had the heart of a man. "Oh, no," she protested, and for lack of words, cupped her hands beneath her naked breasts and lifted them slightly. He flapped his hand through the fog of smoke and with the other hand gave a desultory shake of his maraca. He said she did not want to heal her child. How could this be? She did not have the words to say the child repelled her, made her ashamed. Instead, she imitated Salomon's pathetic, slack expression, the eyes in which no spark lived. She said the word for man, and patted her chest with a flat hand and pronounced, "Tristan." "Tristan fucks you," he said, in effect. "Yes," she said, "but not for 3 years," and with her fingers prettily mimed a fetter about her bare ankle. "He has been made a slave by evil men," she said, dizzily proud of the length of this utterance. "He is black." Fearing that this was not clear, she drew his tall outline in the air and held up a piece of charcoal from the edge of the fire. In addition, she pointed up through the hut's little smoke hole, where a star or two glimmered in a circle of black, for it had become night. His people come from across the great ocean, from another great island, greater than even Brazil, where the sun has made people black. "Maira, what is it you want my magic to do?" As she explained, the shaman's browless eyes widened and his toothless jaw opened, at first in incomprehension and then in comprehension. He said, as far as she could understand, "Magic is a way of adjusting nature. Nothing can be created. When something here is placed there, something there must be placed here. For every gain, there is a sacrifice somewhere else. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Are you willing to sacrifice for this Tristan?" "I already have. I've lost my world. I've lost my father." "Are you willing to change yourself?" "Yes, if he will still love me." "Then we will begin tomorrow, Maira. What we do, we must do in the daylight, over 6 days. How will you pay me?" he asked. "When I left my home, I gave up much property. All I have left is a little cross covered with jewels." "I will take that." He pointed at her ring, the ring that said D-A-R. "No, please. Tristan gave it to me, to pledge himself to me." "Then it is good. It holds both of your spirits." Heartsick, she slipped off the inscribed ring and set it in the shaman's cupped hand. "For the treatment to take hold, you must know my name. My name is Tejugupapo." "Tejugupapo." "The treatment will change you." "I'm in your hands, Tejugupapo." You have a man's big spirit, a warrior's fury to live. In the days that followed, Yana Pamoko was enlisted in the magical treatments, which involved painting Isabel over her entire body with the black dye called genipapo. As Yana Pamoko worked, covering Isabel's radiant white skin, young girls from the Mesa community assisted her, using little brushes made from capybara bristles pinched in sticks of split bamboo. Each forenoon, the process was repeated, always with different designs to cover the dwindling intervals of pale skin. After each grueling overlay, Isabel was covered more solidly with the color of genipapo. On the seventh day, she was a blackish brown, darker than coffee beans but lighter than strong coffee, everywhere but on her palms, the soles of her feet, the skin beneath her nails, and the insides of her eyelids. Her platinum hair had been rubbed, strand by strand, with black gum, so often it had thickened and tightly curled. Her body, in its new ebony pelt, showed the knotted muscularity her labors as Antonio's third wife had earned her, a length of curved bone and a bulging tautness of buttock and calf and breast that pressed back against space, that wanted to stride and move, to roll. She looked now more like the warrior Tejugupapo had told her sex concealed. Her eyes were still gray-blue. The shaman told her, "Eyes are the window of the spirit. When your soul becomes black, then will your eyes also." In parting, he warned her, "Now you must seek a protector. You are no longer Ma'ira. Your skin is no longer magic." During their 17 days returning, through the selva that lavished its fruits and nuts upon them, and whose faint paths the two women traced in a green gloom amid the cries of monkeys and parrots, Yana Pamoko was tremulously affectionate, clasping black, lithe Isabel to her with a new fury, a fury born of foreboding. When they came to the river, the Bandeirantes' encampment on the far side seemed ominously quiet. The little dugout canoe they had stolen to make their escape was still where they had hidden it. Yana Pamoko insisted they drift in it downstream, beyond where the cultivated fields gave out, and only there cross over. Then, in the morning, she would creep through the fields and reconnoiter. Isabel must stay behind. "My people will protect me. They know me," she said, "and they no longer would know you." "But Antonio will be furious with you for running away. I had planned to protect you." Yana Pamoko touched Isabel's upper arm. "Dearest mistress, I fear now a defense from you would carry no weight." When the dawn awoke her, Isabel was covered with dew, and Yana Pamoko was gone. When the sun stood at its mid-morning height, Yana Pamoko had still not returned. Isabel crept forward cautiously, carrying her spear along the edges of the fields of manioc and black beans. On the packed, swept earth, between the long pavilion and Antonio's house, Isabel found the fresh corpse of Yana Pamoko, her slender arms sliced from her torso. The lake of red in which the scattered body lay was still partly liquid. "Of all God's wonders, a nigger wench," an archaic baritone thundered behind her in Portuguese. Isabel turned to see José Peixoto, his hatless face frenzied and sunburned, approaching her with an uplifted broadsword. "How came thee here?" he asked her. "Art thou yet another who conspires in my foul brother's treachery?" He was drunk, she realized, on fatigue and despair, if not cachaça. He focused upon Isabel blearily and decided, "Negrinha, you might not bring a mill race in Bahia, but everything living has become my enemy. Before I clear my mind of thy riddle, though, thou'lt serve as well as any to ease an aching groin." Holding the ponderous sword still high in his right hand, with his left he fumbled at the buckle, belting in his leather trousers. He had exposed a nub of dirty gray flesh, pudgy and short as poor little Salomon's, and far from erect. A flicker of embarrassment crossed his murderous face. "Down on it, filth," he said. She willed herself to kneel. Before her trembling knees could take up the command, a tall, bearded white man appeared behind José, and with a swift whistle of air and a crisp crunch of sliced bone, buried a long-handled tool in the banderanche's skull. José fell at her feet. The weapon that had slain him she recognized as the rusty adze used to hollow canoes, but her pale savior, with his slender frame, tall forehead, and melancholy brown eyes, was a stranger to her. Or was he? His beard was fleecy, but the lips within it had a determined rueful set she knew well.